Welcome to Inspired Living with Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector. Every Wednesday, Marc, along with his special guests, will explore thought-provoking topics and ideas that promote creativity, self-help, healing, happiness, and well-being to inspire you on your spiritual journey. Each week, Marc will discuss different paths to achieving a more spiritual, balanced, happy, and healthy lifestyle. Topics will elevate consciousness and range from metaphysics to the human and social experience and all things spiritual. Welcome to an inspired community that offers support, encouragement, and new ways of thinking. Marc is a tested, certified, and professional spiritual medium, metaphysical teacher, healer, and spiritual advisor with a spiritual practice based in Seattle, Washington. You are the inspired and the inspiration.
And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be in this magical, magnanimous, magnificent, majestic, marvelous, metaphysical, miraculous, mind-awakening, mind-boggling, and mind-blowing planet of ours. This is another episode of Inspired Living, where you are the inspired and the inspiration. So let's be inspired, let's inspire others, and let's inspire before we expire. I am your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, here with you yet again for another soul adventure and an inspiring episode to explore, discuss, and discover the many diamonds within each and every one of us and the many gems in our world that have yet to be revealed. So get comfortable, grab your favorite drink, kick back, sit back, or lie back, taking a nice, deep, healing, peaceful, and cleansing breath. And let us prospect and learn together as we are going to discuss a few topics on today's show. One is the Getting Along Academy, and we're going to be speaking with the president of that academy and a book that he has written, Letters to Mikey, Messages of Hope and Optimism for Young Americans. So let's get on this journey on the many pathways of life to dream, discover, explore, and experience through body, mind, and spirit for another inspiring, uplifting, and educational episode. As always, we always give a big shout out and say thank you, thank you, thank you to all of our inspired listeners from around the globe, the universe, and beyond. My team and I here at Inspired Living Radio are always so very humbled and grateful for you listening, downloading, subscribing, leaving reviews, and voting to make Inspired Living Radio and Podcast not only just a best inspirational show, but now a best spiritual show according to FeedSpot. So if you want to follow and listen to us, you can check us out on many different social media channels. We are on Facebook. You can look for Inspired Living Radio and Podcast. You can also follow us over on Instagram and Twitter. Well, it's not Twitter anymore. It's now X, formerly known as Twitter. Just look for Inspired for Us. That is the number 4, Inspired for Us. You can also catch us on our YouTube channel, Inspired Living Radio, or my YouTube channel, which has grown tremendously. Thank you for that, for Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector. And we're also now streaming through Audible or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Simply say, Alexa, open up Inspired Living Podcast to play the latest episode. And we want to just say, thank you. We really appreciate you participating with us today live. And if you don't catch the live episode, you can always catch encore shows throughout the week here on the wonderful Om Times radio and media platform. So as I like to say, are we ready to go prospecting? It's a new day, a new opportunity, a day we've not seen before to use our intuition to prospect this wonderful world around us. So today, joining us for the first time is Mr. Glenn Cort, the Executive Director of the Getting Along Academy and author of his new book, Letters to Mikey, also known as LTM, Messages of Hope and Optimism for Young Americans. A little bit about Glenn is he is the president of this academy. So we're going to be talking in a couple different subjects today, the Getting Along Academy and the book. I think it's going to be a very packed hour of inspired content and information. But Glenn grew up in Weston, Massachusetts, and is the youngest of 5 children. He's a graduate of Weston High School, 1986, and Ithaca College, 1990, with a BA in sociology. He earned his JD at the BU Boston University Law School in 1990, and Glenn was a prosecuting attorney, a civil litigator, and a criminal defender. He also served briefly in the Civil Rights Division of the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. He entered his father's business enterprise in the late 1990s and spent 30 years helping to change and grow the cultures within these organizations by focusing on human relations. While achieving success by many standards, his definition of success over the years has changed dramatically. In 2020, while pursuing a promise to a friend in Boston city politics, he found himself doing some teaching for a nonprofit in partnership with the Boston City Schools. The experience opened his eyes further to the problems and needs of our society as expressed by his students, and it set him on a new course, a new journey, if you will, a new soul adventure, as I like to say. So, Glenn left his business and his career, and he went in search, as I like to say, prospecting for truth and peace and the many diamonds that are within and the many diamonds that are all around us. He completed his first book, Letters to Mikey, which is a message of hope and optimism for young adults in 2023. And he's the founder of the gettingalong.com and the Getting Along Academy Incorporated, which is a 501c3 charity registered in October of 2023 as well. And its purpose is to build resiliency and unlock the full potential in our youth so that they may someday end terrible disagreement and hate forever. Glenn has three children, Caitlin, John, and Mikey. Shout out to them. And resides with his wife Brooke, shout out to her, and their dog Gracie, shout out to Gracie, in Weston, Massachusetts. And you can learn more about today's conversation at gettingalong.com, or you can do an internet search for Letters to Mikey, Messages of Hope and Optimism for Young Americans by Glenn Cort. Glenn, welcome to Inspired Living, my friend. How are you?
It is such a pleasure to be with you, Marc. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that. It's such a generous introduction. Thank you. Happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Yes, my pleasure. So let's start off. I think let's go first and foremost into the Getting Along Academy, and we'll jump into the book as well because you open them both in 2023. So you have a lot of goings on right now for this new journey that you decided to take. I want to commend you for the courage because a lot of my listeners, I always remind them, if you don't risk it, there's no biscuit, and if you never leave the nest, you're never going to learn to fly in the things that you want to do. So well done on taking that leap of faith to do this, to open up this academy and to write this book.
Marc, I actually when I sat down to write my book about 3.5-4 years ago, it actually wasn't a book. It was I intended to write a birthday card for my youngest son, Mikey, who was going off to college. Mm-hmm. At that time, as you mentioned, I was doing some teaching in the inner city schools, and I had always been involved with civics, and I became so concerned with what I was seeing out there. I really didn't recognize the world I was living in. I don't know if I don't know if I recognize it now, but back then with my youngest son going off to school, and I had always written Mikey a card. We had always exchanged cards, and I couldn't finish his birthday card, and for me, it would always had something to say to my son. It was a special year with him going off to college, and I just couldn't finish the card. I had lost touch with things that I thought were our reality. In America, I thought, we had so much sturdiness going on in our country and so much to live for, so much hope and optimism. And I just had so much belief in our country and so much belief in the many people I have met. And I thought writing my card, Messages of Hope and Optimism, to all my kids, it always came easy to me. And at that time, it didn't come so easy. And so one page, kind of streamed into the next. And my book turned into an adventure to try to find out what was happening. I mean, I knew we had lost something, and I just I turned it into my own adventure, and I got very lucky. The whole bit about my finding time to do it, that was a stroke of luck. A lot of people don't have the time to go out and get back to the library. I ventured back to the library. To be honest with you, Marc, it was a place I hadn't been back to since law school. That was a lot of years. I just hadn't been back there. I didn't do a lot of reading about philosophy, about history or religion. And I was just reconnecting. At that time, I had a great opportunity to take the time to reconnect, with books and reading. And it may be that you and I want to spend some time just there, because the books that I was reading, I could not believe how special and brilliant the authors were. they were amazing. Because I wasn't a reader, I had just gone into business and done whatever, basically done what everyone else does, and there's nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. You go to work, you provide for your family, and that's what you do. And most of us, only have that opportunity. But I had an opportunity to go back to a place I hadn't been to a long time, that local library. And I spent some time there, and my eyes, again, in search of kind of in search of if there was any truth, if there was any forms of reality, or because we'd seemed to have lost all semblance of, an authority for truth. And what I found in the library, Mark, is that it seemed to me that there were these recurring themes and patterns. The more I read, the more I was awakened, the more I became alive, and the more I became optimistic for our kids' futures, because I was just so fascinated and intrigued with the people who were writing these books. Going back to ancient, I started with ancient philosophy, and I moved through, towards kind of modern day.
Right.
And I was just so impressed with the readers and the things I was reading. So I thought I'd just come up for air there and let you go.
No, that's fantastic. And there's so many diamonds in that, what you just said, and the fact that, you and I were in school around the same time, and we're in the 90s, right? So we were talking pre-internet. We were talking, if you want to go study somewhere, you had to go to a library, or you had a, Britannica Brown encyclopedia series to get your information, to get your knowledge. And now, as we talk here today in 2024, everything is right at your fingertips via a keyboard, right? So the transformation of knowledge and access to knowledge. And what I love about what you said, Glenn, is you went back to your roots. Something, with a simple birthday card to your son Mikey, which means you're gonna have to write 2 more books for Caitlin and John, I imagine, at some point to make it fair between the siblings. But you went back to your roots to dive into the knowledge of books that contain that philosophy, that history. And you're right. Mark Twain talked about this a lot. That history has a rhyme and a rhythm, but it never repeats exactly the same way. And currently, where we're at with all of the media and the social media and the news cycles, it's creating almost too much information, right? So people get turned off from such parts of information. And what I love about your book is you break down. I really tuned into chapter 4, the intended path, and you're in Boston, right? You're in the birthplace of the colonies, where everything really started for America, the birthplace of America. So it's funny that you're on one part of the country. I'm on the completely opposite side, but yet we can see the differences that are happening and the breakdowns in our institutions and the things that are going on in society. But that's why we do shows like this, is because it's for our listeners to inspire them, to maybe get them to maybe go check out their local library, maybe something they haven't done, and pull a book from the shelf and put it physically in your hands and read that information that's been, there for, hundreds of years if they want.
I would have never been able to find the messages or my optimism back had I not been to the library. I want to tell you just real quick. I'm holding an old book. It's crunkled up because I keep it next to my bed. It's by David Brooks. He wrote a book called The Road to Character. And when I read his book, so just the words, the way he parses together sentences, he provides 5 examples of people of character, people of strength of character. Something that, back in the 18th century, when I was reading about the 18th century and parsing Mr. Brooks's book with other books, I'll mention a shout out to Eric Metaxas. He wrote a book called If You Can Keep It: The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. And I started at one book, kind of led into the next book. They had similar themes. They all talked about character being the most important thing in that time. And then I would read about the letters of Ben Franklin, who, being from Boston, this is a man who really had no formal education, but yet invented electricity. So, you learn these little things. It's like, okay. And then I was reading what Ben Franklin said, and then I was reading Thomas Jefferson and the words of Alexander Hamilton, and then I started reading the Federalist Papers. And Mark, I never knew, I'll be honest with you, I didn't remember the Federalist Papers ever existing. And then I turned the pages to Thomas Paine, right? The book he wrote Common Sense. And then I started And then, so the values that were coming out of that era, as you mentioned, my chapter 4, and the age of enlightenment, the age of reason, it was such an important, it lasted. And these are all things that I was relearning, and I was so excited to learn about the age of enlightenment and the age of reason. And what I took away, the number one thing I took away, is that the Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution, our founding documents, they were created after about 80 years. They were at the pinnacle. The age of enlightenment, where we focused on values such as humility, modesty, moderation, and the way Ben Franklin worked, and he put in, he was very modest. That's the one thing that I revealed, that really took me back about Ben Franklin. He ended up, funding libraries in Philadelphia, and and no one knew who bought the library, So it was just how consistent, then I started reading, whether modern day, Barack Obama's book, Ronald Reagan, and it didn't matter. The political left and the political right was nothing like it is today. It was nothing like it is today. So anyhow, it was a consistency in those themes. And I started placing all these amazing books right on my website. I started I was in the car with my daughter and my wife one day. We were heading down to Cape Cod. And I said, guys, I got to start curating a website. And we came up with, I couldn't believe gettingalong.com was available. I couldn't believe it. And, it's kind of corny. My friends are giving me the hardest time. And you're right, Mark, this work is not easy because, politics today are just so, I don't even need to say it, but they're rife with incivility, and everyone's so rigid and tolerant. I mean, they're even, so I know I'm jumping around, but they're, the words today, you can't even say that you're a supporter of Donald Trump or you're a supporter of Joe Biden without someone identifying you as as that, right? As that thing, as that bad thing on the left or the right. When, the reality is that there are 90% of us. I mean, I've met so many people. I like to say 90%. My kids say, Dad, you cannot say 90%. But what I found, and I don't know about your experience, Mark, but I have met so many people of different political persuasions, and I have found that they are not extremists. I've found that you can talk to them, and they will seek the middle. If you don't mind, can I throw a shout out to a website called Braver Angels?
You sure? You bet. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I guess I just did. There's a guy named David Blankenhorn, and I've never met Mr. Blankenhorn, but shout out to him and his organization. They have about an 8 or 9 year head start on my nonprofit. I've looked at what they're doing, and it's just such incredible work. They're trying to bridge the reds and the blues. They're just trying to give us establish a bridge, a different tone. And I read an article from Mr. Blankenhorn called Intellectual. He wrote an article. I don't have it at my fingertips, but it was all about this concept of intellectual humility. Intellectual humility. And the way he wrote, they're just, so many people impress me, and so what I guess I've developed a theory that there's only a small percentage of people that are no longer able to put the common good ahead of their own good. They're no longer able to do it. Now, I can't blame them. I don't want to blame them. I've had, people, I'm aware that people go through terrible traumas and things, in their lives, and they become kind of disassociated and disattached. But what the most optimistic thing I can tell you, Mark, is that if you look at my website and you follow along in this curriculum that I'm trying to develop, is that the question of what we come detached from, is actually very well documented in both philosophical writings, in scripture, across different religions. This idea of humility and not arrogance as opposed to arrogance is something people talk about all the time. And people get up on TED Talks, on TED stages, and they write books about humility. And they also write about something called moderation. David Brooks talks a lot about moderation. In fact, he's the one. I would not have been able to write my book if it wasn't for David Brooks. And there's another guy. I have to shut out if you don't mind, and tell me to be quiet at any time, Mark. I could get going like a buzzard off a poop wagon. So yeah, I could, but I got to. David Brooks. I'm sorry. It's not going to be lost on me because he's an amazing human being. He's writing, and he's very well known today. It's Dr. Jonathan Haidt. It's spelled H-A-I-D-T.
Yep.
He wrote a book 15 years ago. He wrote his first book, Happiness Hypothesis. And I'm going to come up for air now, but all I can tell you is when I read his book and his follow-up book, he explains he's a clinical psychologist, 35 years, and he quotes all of the old philosophers, whether or not, and I can name, I can name many of them, but he quotes many of the smartest people, that have ever lived, or at least according to, conventional wisdom.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. According to history. I mean, he quotes Carl Jung and Friedrich Nietzsche and, Aristotle and Plato and all of them. And he arrives. But what's interesting about Dr. Haidt is that he takes all the philosophy, but then he adds in clinical science. He starts talking about, our human nature from a scientific standpoint. And so that's the bridge. That's the bridge from spiritual or philosophical, because back in the day, as everything was about religion, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, when I back in the day, going back, everyone, all the old books talks about, they talk about religion and God is, just parsed through. I mean, the impact, of Christianity and other major, Hinduism and Confucianism and the impact, of God is all throughout. But what's interesting is that you can actually tie the messages of Scripture to the messages, of modern day science. For example, arrogance. Dr. Haidt talks about how we become self-righteous, how we become so groupish. And he actually. So what starts freaking me out, Mark, and the reason why I'm hoping you and I can stay in touch, and your listeners will stay in touch, is because what's fascinating to me now is that we have millions of people, not only philosophers, but we also have thousands of modern day people, that we know more now about how people become, unhappy. There's a book out of, there's a 3-year study done out of Harvard. I'm sure you're familiar with it. There's a author named Dr. Robert Waldinger. He's a Boston-based guy, and I'm sorry I don't have his book at my fingertips. After 3 years, of studying human flourishing, they have now scientifically come up with the number one or number two things that make us thrive. And so, obviously, the opposite of thriving, is thriving being happy. I guess in my chapter 10, I write about this, and I say, we have a better chance of overcoming our anxieties and our fears today. And I talk about my own anxieties, and that's why I'm rambling on right now, because I'm probably anxious. So yeah, and but we know now today the science is very clear, and there's actually, they have more diagnosis, treatment, and prevention, for kind of irrational fears and how we create, imagined enemies, and we just imagining our fears. Our fears are overcoming us. And it's kind of encouraging that these doctors, if anyone's reading, if we could get our kids to read, with all due respect to everybody, if we could get our kids to read, then they'll understand there are tools and there are ways, but there is a reason why we become so dug in to our positions.
Right. And that, that reminds me of what Einstein talked about. The human brain on average weighs about 3 pounds, right? But it's one of the most complex organisms in the entire universe, right? There's so much And I think, with everything you said, one of the quotes that was coming to my mind from, Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, is he always talked about, I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past, right? So our past teaches us, our history teaches us, and this age of enlightenment that, I've read all of the writings of Benjamin Franklin. In fact, I just finished the 8-part series on Apple TV. Michael Douglas played Benjamin Franklin. And if you think about how this country really came together, there was a lot. You talked earlier about luck. You talked about there's a lot of luck for writing this book, and the luck of even having a country called the United States of America is quite fascinating to me. And it shows us that this is a experiment. Democracy is an experiment, something that was never achieved up until 248 years ago with the Declaration of Independence. And that's an interesting timeline that we're going to have to pick up on the other side when we have our first break here, because history also teaches us that empires get to about 250 years and they either change, falter, collapse, or continue on like the Romans did. So we're at 248 years, so we're getting close to that timeline. But what's interesting is the history teaches us for a brighter future, for a better future, and the information that we have. But we have to go through these technology transformations. I always said that the Roaring 20s, I've done many podcasts about this, the Roaring 20s would be very transformative. And politics is one of those transformations because people have technology at their fingertips, the latest iPhone, the latest Android, the latest AI, which is creating new things that our society has never gone through. And one of the quotes that I go back to, when I read Abraham Lincoln's biography, he talked about the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. And this is during, the Civil War. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. And I believe, Glenn, this is where we're going. We have to go through these troubling times, these disturbing times, these ignorant times, these divided times, so we can actually start to think with the technology at our fingertips and think anew and act anew and not be a part of that group think, oh, you're in this party or you're in that party. And that's what politics has done even during the time of Abraham Lincoln. So I have a lot of hope for where we're going. And you've created an academy to help people get there, the Getting Along Academy. So let us go to our first break, because I want to get back and continue this conversation. I knew we were going to have a lot of content to try to, jam in here to an hour, but we're going to be right back here in just a few minutes. We have our special guest today, Glenn Cort, talking about Letters to Mikey and the Getting Along Academy. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
The future of internet radio is here. Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of Om Times Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of Om Times. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
One planet, 7.3 billion people. Only one you. Life offers us many opportunities and learning experiences. Are you ready to explore and discover this beautiful planet, the life and energy all around us, the spiritual world, and what is unseen, along with your own personal soul adventure? Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, is the spiritual connection you have been prospecting for. Internationally known as a tested and professional clairvoyant medium and spiritual advisor, Marc's work as a metaphysical teacher, medical instructor, radio show host, inspirational writer, and hiking guide are here to help you on a journey of self-discovery, healing, inspiration, education, and a whole lot of spiritual awesomeness. Dare to dream. Dare to explore. Dare to live. For more information on Marc's spiritual practice in Seattle, Washington, please visit marclainhart.com or internet search The Intuitive Prospector.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. ascendinghearts.com.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break because she may not be having lunch again until September? Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing a job
and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Inspired Living Radio. We're going to open the second part of the show with a quote from Benjamin Franklin. Quote, "When you're good to others, you're best to yourself." Today's special guest, Glenn Cort, talking about his book, Letters to Mikey, Messages of Hope and Optimism for Young Americans, and the Getting Along Academy, which is a 501c academy. Let's talk about that, because it's just so this last part of the show is going to go by so quick, and I want to get some questions into you, Glenn, if that's okay, because we just talked about the history and how this country's come together, and it's so divided. But for you, I know that you wrote this book because it started with a birthday card to your son Mikey, and it became an eureka moment that led to this journey that you're now on. But tell us a little bit about the book, and tell us a little bit about the academy.
Thank you. So the book will be the foundation, of a curriculum that where the mindset was, you wrote a book, you spent 3 years doing it. It was a research project, and it revealed to me what's something we haven't talked about yet is really these universal kind of ideas, or these the consistent themes or recurring patterns that kept coming to me. In fact, I write in the book, because you're a spiritual podcast, I want to tell you about a spiritual moment I had. I got very spiritual one night. I hadn't been spending a lot of time in the library, as you know, over my life, and I had my head down. I think I'd become an ostrich. When I went into the voting booth, to be honest with you, I voted for myself. I voted for what is best for myself. And I don't blame myself for doing that at the time. In fact, I'm not sure if I still blame people for doing that today.
Sure.
However, things, there comes a time in your life, I was lucky enough to have a change in my life and, be able to read, and go to the library, and all these recurring themes and patterns started coming to me. And they talked about, it really hit me when I read in the Declaration of Independence, they talk about nature's laws and nature's God. I recognize in developing a curriculum, that I hope to someday get into public schools, that I can't mention God. I have to, mention a higher faith, a higher purpose. I want to do a quick shout out to a website called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. It's Dr. Jordan Peterson's group. I know Dr. Peterson has come under fire, political fire, and I know he's a political lightning rod, if you will, for some reason, but he shouldn't be. Anyhow, there's a video on his website at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, which really struck me, because the way he talks about faith, this divine purpose that we have, it was very consistent with what I learned about from all the research I did. And so what I established in chapter 6 of my book is, and I don't think I would have finished my book, Marc, had I not found what I call the natural laws. They're the rules of the universe. This idea that there actually is a predestined path for us. And sadly, I hate to be an absolutist, but my wife hates it when I do this. But ultimately, things have been so bad for so long. I mean, we know more than we know today for so long. And so what fascinates me is we know so much about our human nature. We have more tools that are to be happy than technology, and we can text from the middle of the woods, and we can ask Alexa to play us a song. all these amazing tools, and there have never been more unhappy people in America. We have more people locked up in America. We call ourselves the land of the free. We have more people locked up in our country in jail and in prison than all of the other civilized or large nations combined. So there's something distorted. There's something distorted, and so what I it's really hard to explain. But what I when I found the natural laws, all the natural laws say is this. Marcus Cicero said, "We're given a special dispensation. Human beings, we're given a special dispensation to reason and to become virtuous, like no other animal on the planet." He's saying that human beings are at the top, and that we were born to grow virtuous and then take care of all other species. And we also, what you find in the research and in all the readings from what people say is we also were born with the ability and the capacity to know right from wrong. I become an author on something called Substack, which is a subscription-based, subscription-based thing. And
platform. Yep.
Yeah, the platform there, and it's it allows me to kind of break down some of the themes and some of these ideas that about these natural laws. So if they're complex, then, but
I think I think for the sake of time that we actually get the listeners to go check out your book, because you write about this in chapter 6, I think you said, and I think that would be a good plug to get the book, so you can actually learn about the laws that you're referencing. Because as what I love what you said, your spiritual moment. Spirituality is your ability to shift your perspective of how you voted. You voted based on your wants, needs, desires, and something inside from your learning, from your knowledge, from your wisdom has then probably since changed. And that's what I always talk to people, my students, my listeners, myself. It is your ability to shift your perspective. That is what spirituality is all about. And what gives me hope is, I always go back to the philosophers. Confucius talked about this, that our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. And I believe that America needs to fall so it can rise again. Because if you ask somebody, what are the first 3 words of the Constitution of the United States? Today's generation probably couldn't, part of the population could not answer that. And it's the 3 most powerful words in the Constitution is "we the people." And at some point, history teaches us that 70% of "we the people" will move forward with enlightenment, move forward with transformation, move forward. But there'll always be 30% that refuse to change, want to go backwards. Ignorance is bliss. I'm going to, just keep my blinders on. And now you add social media to that, and everybody has an opinion behind a keyboard. But studies show us as well, when you put people together in a room, that behavior changes and goes away. So we have to grow and transform through our technology, and we either grow through it or, the opposite of growth is decay, right? Once growth stops, decay begins. But I love, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today's show, it's the Getting Along Academy, because we can agree to disagree, but what we've lost is civility, kindness, compassion. And what we need to do is bring that back. You're right. We have a lot of incarceration in this country. We have to change some of the institutions in which this country was founded in order as part of transformation. But we know transformation does not happen overnight. It's a slow, steady progression of evolution. And it's our roaring 20s. I said that our roaring 20s, years ago in 2018, 2019, I said, buckle up, listeners. The roaring 20s are going to be quite transformative. And that's just assuming that we're the only smartest species on the planet, right? Who knows what the future holds in this big galaxy of ours, right? Are we truly alone? That could be, we've had guests on, we've talked about how transformative that could be for our philosophy and our thinking, to be like, wait a minute, maybe humans aren't the only intelligent species on the planet or out in the universe. And so I love that you have this Getting Along Academy. And again, for the listeners out there, you can go to gettingalong.com. You can check out the book on Amazon, Letters to Mikey, Messages of Hope and Optimism for Young Americans by Mr. Glenn Cort. And what do you foresee for this academy that you have now created? You brought it into our reality. I always say that your focus determines reality. You brought this into our reality. What do you hope to do with it?
I love your patience because you're encouraging and you're optimistic and spiritual that things will hit a rock bottom and then we shall somehow, arise and kind of arise from the ashes and fix everything. I love your encouragement. We establish what I've done with the curriculum. I just recently hired a bunch of interns. We have about 7 of them. 4 are 16-year-old high school kids from Boston. I'm loving working with them. And what I did is I showed them a presentation. I had them read the book. We talked about the book for a number of weeks, got a bunch of feedback, because ultimately the curriculum is for them, right? It's aimed for young people. And they're giving me feedback, and they're challenging me because what I did is I laid the first start of the presentation or the curriculum is really these natural laws, which are, again, just that people, we have to believe, I believe we're going to have to ultimately believe in the goodness of human beings at our birth. And then the idea that we disassociate and we come apart from something. And so what I do is I establish the something only based on all the research and only based on, the various philosophers. And so right now I've challenged the interns to actually challenge me back. They're looking at various religions, philosophies, and cultures. And they're saying, Mr. Cort, you might be, you're coming across too absolutist. The only absolute thing that I'm basically saying, though, that we are instructed here as human beings, that this idea that there is a predestined path for our behavior, and the idea that we're breaking some simple rules. I mean, look at what we have out there. Look at how many years we have of endless hate and wars. So the question becomes, what are we missing? And so it could be that there is a path. And I found, and it's not my opinion, I'm taking it from all the various things that I've read, I've found that it's humble, not arrogant, and I've also found that it's modest and moderate in all things. So those are the 3 tenets of natural laws that we have. We have human beings are at the top of the food chain. We were born to be good and virtuous. We have those amazing capabilities, which I don't think a lot of people should question. I mean, you can look around us, we have amazingly smart people. But what's happening is that we come apart, away from our virtue, we lose our way, we take the slide, and I don't think that's a lot of us. I think we're able to overcome. I think human beings are so amazing that many people are able to overcome the trauma and the poverty and the poor, the generational, trauma that they have in their lives. It's amazing what people can overcome. But what happens, I'm afraid, or at least my contention is that enough of us get angry, self-righteous, and in my book, I have a whole chapter about this difference between an extraordinary person, someone moving beyond their ordinary, right? Talk about kind of getting it stuck. Because I didn't want to give anyone a hard time. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to call, I didn't want to put down, any of our national politicians who, who are basically, can we get them to stop behaving? I mean, how do we get our national politicians, Marc, to stop behaving like 2-year-olds? Now, are the ones that are behaving like 2-year-olds, can they look in the mirror and ask themselves, am I just stuck in my ordinary? I mean, shouldn't I be more virtuous? Could I go back and read about the founding fathers? Because if you read about all the founding fathers, they talked about character and civility and dignity. They were in the same battle together. They were fighting for the common good. So it's sad to see what's happening on our national politics. It frustrates me so much. It's given me, it's going to be my life pursuit now to try to fix our politics. I guess by creating better leaders. We have to create better leaders, and if we create better leaders through our kids, and we have them regain the hope in themselves and see the goodness in people that is there, and then understand how we lose it. So that's what I have the interns working on right now, how we detach. We've actually created a list of ingredients, to our detachment. And the one thing I'm very afraid of, and I wanted to ask you, Marc, is that I'm learning that this social media thing and the internet is changing, might have changed everything forever. I mean, it may be a communication tool. It defines who we are now. It defines our politics. It almost when we get a new president, it's social media is the president. I mean, it's poisoned. It's poisoned our society in a way, that's very scary. If you read, I'm just going to throw out real quick the three resources that I get that from. Is there's a book called Chaos Machine.
Yeah.
Chaos Machine by Max Fisher.
Okay.
And then there's a fantastic documentary that I have a link to on my website. Obviously, at Getting Along. Can't believe I just plugged that. GettingAlong.com. It's called Trust Me Documentary. It's called Trust Me Documentary. And it just shows it. And then also Dr. Jonathan Haidt has written several books. His last one called The Anxious Generation. And the scientists today are making a claim that this social media and internet thing, it may take us down.
It may, and we've talked about this. This is part of transformation, but I'm going to go back to the Founding Fathers, right? Because the Founding Fathers created a new idea, this thing that we call an experiment of democracy based on the civil wars, the religious wars that they went through, right? Something was created out of chaos, right? And like I tell my students, we've actually looked at the top 10 religions around the world, and they all have similar stories based on love, compassion, kindness. And, with the internet, I'll even take it back to John Adams. John Adams talked about posterity a lot, right? Posterity is the noun meaning future generations. And he talked about that posterity, you will never know how much it will cost the present generation to preserve your freedom. And I hope that you'll make good use of it, right? This is what we have to go through, because what's going to be born out of this is maybe the United States may not look like the United States in the future. It may have a different appearance. Think Portugal, Spain, that kind of, conflict led to a birth of something new, right, that we call today. But the Founding Fathers created something out of chaos, out of divide, out of religious doctrine that they didn't want to have in this thing called democracy. And so for my vision, I see that we have to go through this. And the social media, as AI starts to come in, AI is going to start to clean up a lot of misinformation, disinformation, cognitive dissonance, which is going to help us. But we'll look back at this period of time as a very dysfunctional period of time, because no point in history have we ever been so connected as a species, as a society, but we're more disconnected. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be that 70-30, that 70% of the people want to connect back to values, compassion, love, kindness, treat your neighbor, go back to those values. And the 30% will continue to, just be on status quo and go about their way. But I think things are born out of conflict and chaos that creates new. And that's part of enlightenment. That's part of transformation. And, when I talk to people, you're right. Most people are very moderate, mostly in the center. There's not, all you heard about is the extremes in the political party. And there's a saying that, politics is war without violence. War is politics with violence. And hopefully we can start to learn and not repeat our patterns of war and chaos and in ego and arrogance and power and control. And believe it or not, that's what a lot of the politics are today. And was it Winston Churchill? So think about Winston Churchill back in his time, that a lie could get halfway around the world before he had time to put his pants on. That was back in 1942, right? The 1940s. Think about it today, about how much information gets out before it gets out. It's already out there on alerts on. So we're going to have to work through this to actually have evolution, to have transformation, to have knowledge. But I see a brighter future. And you're right, it's going to be dependent on today's generation that's growing up, because it's much different than your generation and my generation, because we grew up at the same time and we didn't have internet. We didn't have cell phones. We did not have social media. And that's where I put my faith in where we're going. And I think it's going to be quite transformative and quite eye-opening to what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, it's great. I hope we can stay in touch, Marc, because your enthusiasm and your optimism, I love it. I mean, all we have is hope and optimism, right? If we lose our hope and optimism,
exactly.
What are we left with? I just think the negative media, the negative news media is a huge problem. I don't know how it is that people watch CNN and cable news and Fox every night. It's amazing how negative things are, even in our papers and our local news. I mean, why? Nothing really shows that. There's very little that is showing how great, how many great deeds are done every day and how many great things are happening out there. And I guess, my only thing to you, my friend, is 90%. You have it at 70-30. I think the negative people bringing us down and the negative voices are having with the internet have such an oversized influence on us. But I only think they're about 10%. I think 90% of us can see through the garbage, and the kind of I call them. I'm not sure if you saw my chapter on myths, but John F. Kennedy, JFK, gave a speech in 1961 at Yale graduation. Right. And he talked about myths, and he talked about how we often enjoy the comfort of our opinion without the discomfort of thought.
Powerful. And I like your percentage better. I like 90-10, but that 70-30, yeah, no, I'm with you. That 70-30 is actually based on historical, reading the biography of Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant. In fact, Ulysses S. Grant talked about that the next civil conflict in America wouldn't come from the Mason-Dixon line. It would come from lies, ignorance, misinformation. And you kind of think about where we're at today. He was seeing something back in 1865, right? So, it's I'll take that 90%, and I think technology and what's coming with AI is going to help clean up some of this social media, because we never had this before as a species, and we have to grow through it. And there's growing pains, right? That's not every lesson is fun, and that's what society's going through. And Maya Angelou, who if you know her story, talk about overcoming trauma and grief and tragedy. Maya Angelou is somebody that it's just, if you don't know her story, read up on her. But she talked about history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And I think that's where we need to have the hope, the courage. I think the Getting Along Academy is brilliant. Inspired Living is in your back court if you want to come back on and continue to have this conversation. But I'll tell you, Glenn, the reason I started this podcast 8 seasons ago of Inspired Living was to start having ripple effects and thoughts and conversations of positivity, platforms of positivity, to put that out, and they can be listened to today, but also can be listened to in the future, and that people can start resonating with the messages that we're talking about and the content that we're putting out there today.
Yeah, my hat's off to you, Marc. I wish if we had a cloning machine, we'd put Marc Lainhart through the cloning machine for every. We'd have a pretty darn good country. I just came across it. You love your quotes, and I actually just luckily flipped through to one quote. Can I give it to you real quickly?
You bet. Do it.
So, Dr. Jonathan Sachs, in his book Morality, he had since passed away. One of the first books I read after David Brooks's book. He wrote at the end, he said, when we move from the politics of me to the politics of us, we rediscover those life-transforming, counterintuitive truths, that a nation is strong when it cares for the weak, that it becomes rich when it cares for the poor, that it becomes invulnerable when it cares for the vulnerable.
Yeah, diamonds right there. Powerful.
It's one of my favorites. So, there's so many heroes out there, and I hope you can pick up, your readers will pick up Dr. Eric Metaxas, author Eric Metaxas' book. It's on my website. He talks about we're not venerating our heroes anymore. We need to do that. And I just so thankful for you to, have your listeners, and I'm thankful to your listeners to, if they'll check out our site and check out our work and show an interest. We're just really appreciative.
You bet. And again, for the listeners out there, thanks for listening today. And you can go to gettingalong.com to start your journey. If you're into wanting to help the younger generation regain hope and optimism for our country, if you're looking to get into a charity to help, us as a species, as a people, as a country to come together. From there, you can learn all about the mission, the book, the academy, the resources. You can get Glenn's book, Letters to Mikey. I definitely recommend getting that book. It was I had a fun time reading it. And before we end, with just the time we have left, what I like to do for my guests is, what or who inspires you, Glenn? What or who inspires you?
Wow.
Put you on the spot.
I'm easily inspired. Man, shout out to my wife. She's an inspiration. She's a survivor. She's she's an empath. She's a lover. She's kind. She's compassionate. You know, she's just she's amazing. She's amazing. She's very much like my mother. You know, who was the same way. Was just always just kind. Her kindness and compassion is amazing. She's a people person, and our super empaths, out there, the people who are most loving and kind and compassionate, they often get a bad rap because they come across as maybe not being as social, not being as confident, But these are the people that are there to change the world.
Exactly.
It's amazing how our loudest voices, are just dominating things, and it's just. Yeah, it's sad. So, yeah, it would be my wife is on the top of my list today. Marc, my mother, she was such a kind person. She used to bring orange slices up to the Little League field for both teams. Yeah, so she was that type of person. But yeah, shout out to my wife, and obviously my kids are great. It's the first premise in my book. The first page talks about. Just when you look in these kids and you see our children, and you see how smart they are and how kind of intuitive and curious and just smart they are, all naturally. It's just encouraging. It gives me hope and optimism to talk with young people, and that's where I want to be. I want to continue to talk with the young people. The young people out there inspire me.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks, Glenn, for being on. Until our next soul adventure together. Be kind, be caring, be compassionate. Most importantly, dare to dream, dare to explore, dare to live, and discover the diamond within. We'll see you next time here on Inspired Living. Take care, everybody.